Distinguished guests, all protocols observed. It's a great honor to join our NGO partner, Frolics of Hope Africa, at the 2024 Trafficking in Persons Conference in Kenya. My speech is titled, Taking a Stand to Protect Our Children. Human trafficking is a grave human rights violation. Worldwide, almost 20% of all human trafficking victims are children who are exploited sexually, forced into labor, forced into child marriages as child brides, used as child soldiers, or brutally killed for body organs. According to UNICEF, human trafficking is a 150 billion industry. Human trafficking lives in the shadows. It is impossible to know how many cases are happening without being reported. What is the scale of human trafficking in Kenya? According to recent reports, Kenya is a source, a transit and destination country for human trafficking. The National Council on Children's Services, NCCS, estimates that around 17,500 Kenyans are trafficked annually for domestic work, forced labor, commercial sex exploitation, and 50% of them are children. The problem is particularly acute in urban centers where traffickers exploit the high demand for cheap labor and commercial sex. The National Council for Children's Services is a state corporation established under the Section 41 of the Children's Act in 2022. And this council is mandated to do four things: regulate, coordinate, and oversee children's services in Kenya and advise the government of Kenya on all matters relating to children. I would like to reiterate that human trafficking lives in the shadows. And that is why it is so difficult to report on it. And we don't have as much data as we imagine we should. According to Kenya's Counter Trafficking in Person Act number 8 of 2010, a person commits the offense of trafficking in persons when this individual recruits, transports, transfers, harbors, or receives another person for the purpose of exploitation by the following means: by threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, abduction, fraud, deception, abuse of power or of the position of vulnerability, by giving payments or benefits to obtain the consent of the victim of trafficking in persons, or by giving or receiving payments or benefits to obtain the consent of a person having control over the other. According to Kenya's Counter Trafficking in Persons Act number 8 of 2010, human trafficking can take many forms. We're going to narrow them down to 6. Number 1 is sexual exploitation. This is the most common form of human trafficking. In many instances, women traffickers are used to create a false sense of security to lure victims, especially children. Number 2 is forced labor and child labor. This is the second most common form of trafficking. Forced labor is less frequently detected and reported than trafficking for sexual exploitation because it is disguised in many households, in many places of work as volunteer, support staff, and all that. The third one is keeping a person in a state of slavery or subjecting a person to practices similar to slavery or involuntary servitude. Number 4 is forcible or fraudulent use of any human being for removal of their body organs, or body parts. Number 5 is forcible or fraudulent use of any human being to take part in armed conflict, such as forcing children to be child soldiers. And lastly, forced marriages and child brides. What are the factors that render one vulnerable to traffickers? Traffickers often prey on the most vulnerable members of our societies, including women and children and marginalized communities. Key factors that render one to be vulnerable to human trafficking include disability, mental illness, poverty, hunger, lack of livelihoods in the household, lack of social safety net, such as child-headed homes or unsafe homes where individuals face abuse, natural disasters, political instability, and access to unsafe websites, online platforms, and computer games. What is the impact of human trafficking on victims and the society? The consequences of human trafficking are devastating both to the individual victims and our society as a whole. Victims often suffer from physical and psychological trauma, including physical abuse, sexual assault, and emotional manipulation. They also face social stigma, difficulty in reintegrating into the communities, and long-lasting health problems. The ripple effect of human trafficking can be felt throughout our communities, contributing to the erosion of social cohesion, economic instability, and the perpetuation of cycles of poverty and exploitation within our society. How is the government of Kenya combating human trafficking, you may ask? As the primary duty bearer, our government has worked so hard to protect human rights in Kenya and plays a critical role in addressing the scourge of human trafficking, especially those of children. This includes enacting and enforcing robust legislation, providing comprehensive support services for victims, and collaborating with civil society and international partners to dismantle trafficking networks and bring perpetrators to justice. The government of Kenya has taken some steps to address human trafficking, and this includes the enactment of the Counter-Trafficking in Persons Act in 2010 and the establishment of the Counter-Trafficking in Persons Advisory Committee. The establishment of the National Council for Children's Services, a state corporation created under Section 41 of the Children's Act of 2022. The council draws on its mandate from Section 42 of the Children's Act 2022. It performs 4 roles. 1, regulate, coordinate, oversee children's services in Kenya, and number 4, advise the government on all matters relating to children. What gaps then exist? These efforts have been hampered by a lack of resources, lack of political will, and poor coordination among government agencies. Organizations such as Frolics of Hope Africa face this every day in the process of seeking justice or reporting, rehabilitating, reintegration of children who have been trafficked into the communities. And our phenomenal executive director, Nkadha Mgao, also the founder of Frolics of Hope Africa, can tell you stories of how many times she has gone into government offices and knocked on their doors, and she's been disappointed because of these gaps that exist. And so we are speaking out of experience, and we are seeking answers today. What can we all do? What can you do? That's why we're here today. Together, let's advocate for our government to take immediate and comprehensive action to combat human trafficking, especially those of children, that goes unnoticed. This can be achieved through various advocacy efforts, such as organizing public awareness campaigns, such as this one, to educate the public on the realities of human trafficking in our communities, lobbying government officials and policymakers to really prioritize the issue and allocate resources to anti-trafficking initiatives. Number 3, for collaboration with civil society organizations, international partners, the private sector, and amplifying our demands and holding our government accountable. And number 4, I propose utilizing social media. We all are on social media, as well as traditional media platforms, to shine a spotlight on the government's inaction and call for an urgent need for change. Ladies and gentlemen, in addition to all this, governments can collaborate and bring together and support initiatives such as this through funding. We must also explore opportunities to partner with other non-governmental organizations and international organizations as well that are working to combat human trafficking in Kenya and outside our borders. These entities often have the expertise and the resources and global reach to complement and strengthen the government's efforts. How can we engage good citizens in the fight against human trafficking? Ultimately, the fight against human trafficking requires the collective efforts of the government, civil society, and the general public. By engaging citizens in this crucial cause, we can build a groundswell of support that compels the government to take decisive action, and this could include initiatives such as encouraging individuals to report suspected cases of human trafficking to the relevant authorities, working with the Kenya National Police, promoting volunteer opportunities and donation drives to support anti-trafficking organizations. Number 4, incorporating human trafficking education into schools, curricula, and community programs. And lastly, fostering a culture of vigilance and social responsibility in our communities through initiatives such as Sikio Mtaani that our amazing non-profit partners are working with, such as Frolics of Hope Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I would like to say and call upon our leaders, the leaders of our great nation of Kenya, to demonstrate the political will and the moral courage to prioritize this issue and take the necessary steps to eradicate human trafficking from our country. By working in partnership with civil society, international organization, the private sector, and the government, we can create a future where no child or adult is subjected to the horrors of human trafficking. Together, let's protect and empower our children. God bless Kenya.